I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, my hands trembling as I gripped the cold porcelain sink. The voices from the dining room still echoed in my head, each word a dagger to my heart. The annual Thompson family Christmas dinner had turned into yet another stage for David's public humiliation show, with his mother playing the ever-willing supporting actress. "At least everyone else here has a real career," David had announced, raising his wine glass as if making a toast. "While my dear wife keeps chasing her childish dreams of becoming a writer." The way he emphasized dear made my skin crawl. I could still see Margaret, my mother-in-law, dabbing her mouth with her napkin, poorly concealing her smirk. "How many copies have you sold this year, darling? Any at all?" The question hung in the air like toxic smoke, choking me slowly. 10 years of marriage had taught me to recognize the warning signs. The slight tightening around David's eyes, the way his fingers drummed against the table. These were the preludes to his carefully orchestrated demonstrations of power. What had started as constructive criticism in the privacy of our home had evolved into these public displays of dominance. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to wash away the burning sensation of shame. The bathroom's yellow light cast harsh shadows under my eyes, making me look older than my 35 years. When had I started looking so defeated? My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from Sarah, my best friend and literary agent. "Check your email now." The urgency in her text was unusual. With trembling fingers, I opened my inbox. Subject: Urgent. Harper & Ross Publishers. "Dear Ms. Thompson, we are thrilled to express our interest in your manuscript, The Silent Echo." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. After 5 years of rejection letters, hundreds of rewrites, and countless nights spent typing while David slept, someone wanted my book. Not just anyone. Harper & Ross, one of the most prestigious publishing houses in New York. A knock on the bathroom door made me jump. "Elizabeth?" David's voice carried that familiar edge of impatience. "Mother's about to serve dessert. Stop hiding in there." Hiding. That's what he always accused me of doing when I wrote, when I dreamed, when I dared to imagine a life beyond the carefully constructed cage he'd built around me. But this time, something was different. This time, I had proof that my dreams weren't childish fantasies. I opened the door to find him leaning against the frame, his expensive cologne mixing with the smell of wine. "Finally," he said, reaching for my arm. "You're embarrassing me." I stepped back just slightly, but enough to see the surprise flash across his face. "I need some air," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Please tell your mother I'm not feeling well." "Elizabeth." His tone carried a warning, but I was already moving past him, grabbing my coat from the rack. The December air hit my face like a wake-up call as I stepped onto the porch. Looking back through the window, I could see the family gathered around the dining table. David's sisters with their successful husbands, Margaret presiding over her kingdom like a queen, and David's empty chair, a void that had somehow come to represent my entire marriage. My phone buzzed again. "Sarah, call me ASAP. This is huge." Standing there in the cold, watching my breath form clouds in the winter air, I made a decision. The novel I'd written about a woman finding her voice had been more than just a story. It had been a prophecy. And now, finally, I had a choice to make. But what I didn't know then, as I stood shivering on that porch, was that this moment would set in motion a chain of events that would not only transform my life, but would also expose secrets that the Thompson family had buried deep beneath their perfectly manicured existence. The real question was I ready for what would happen when I finally stopped playing the role of the dutiful, silent wife and started speaking my truth? The answer arrived in an unexpected way. As Margaret opened the front door, her face a mask of controlled fury. "Elizabeth, you're making a scene. Again." She crossed her arms, the diamond tennis bracelet David had given her catching the porch light. Though I suppose that's what failed writers do best, isn't it? I looked at my mother-in-law, really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw something I'd never noticed before: fear. But what could the mighty Margaret Thompson possibly be afraid of? I was about to find out. That night, after the disastrous Christmas dinner, I didn't go home with David. Instead, I drove to the Blue Corner Cafe, where Sarah and I had spent countless hours discussing plot points and character arcs. It was closed, of course. It was Christmas night. But just sitting in my car in the familiar parking lot helped calm my racing thoughts. My phone had been buzzing nonstop. David's messages grew increasingly demanding. "Where are you? Stop being childish. You're embarrassing both of us. Come home now." I turned off my phone and closed my eyes, remembering how I'd met David 12 years ago. I was working as an English teacher at Lincoln High, dreaming of writing my first novel. He walked into a parent-teacher conference, all charm and perfect smile, representing his niece as her guardian, while his sister was going through a messy divorce. I was instantly captivated by his confidence, his success, the way he seemed to have everything figured out. What I didn't realize then was that his confidence was actually control, his success built on breaking others down, and his perfect life a carefully constructed facade that required constant maintenance, mostly at my expense. The first red flag appeared during our honeymoon in Venice. I'd spent an hour chatting with an elderly Italian couple at a cafe while David was on a business call. When he returned, his smile was tight, his words clipped. "Making friends already? How quaint." Later in our hotel room, he'd lectured me about maintaining appropriate boundaries and representing him properly as his wife. I'd dismissed it as protectiveness, even found it endearing at the time. How naive I'd been. The publishing contract from Harper & Ross felt like a lifeline now. I pulled up Sarah's email again, reading the details I'd skimmed earlier. They weren't just interested in publishing The Silent Echo. They wanted a 3-book deal. The advance alone was more money than I'd made in 2 years of teaching. A tap on my car window nearly gave me a heart attack. Sarah stood there, her red curls wild from the wind, holding 2 cups of coffee from the 24-hour gas station down the street. I unlocked the door, and she slid into the passenger seat, immediately wrapping me in a fierce hug that smelled of coffee and her signature vanilla perfume. "I've been trying to call you for hours," she exclaimed, pulling back to study my face. "When you didn't answer, I figured you'd be here. Liz, do you realize what this means? Harper & Ross never offers 3-book deals to new authors. Never. David says no one will read it," I whispered, hating how small my voice sounded. Sarah's expression hardened. She'd never liked David, had seen through him from the beginning. "David also said you'd never finish writing it. David said you'd never find an agent. David says a lot of things, doesn't he?" She reached into her oversized bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. I brought the contract. I had my brother Jake look it over. "You remember Jake, the entertainment lawyer? He says it's solid. Better than solid, actually. They're offering marketing support, book tour, everything." My hands shook as I took the envelope. "A book tour? 6 weeks, 10 major cities." Sarah's eyes glittered with excitement. "Plus interviews, book signings, the whole package. They really believe in this book, Liz." The implications slowly sank in. A book tour would mean leaving home, traveling alone, speaking in public. All things David had systematically convinced me I was incapable of doing. "He'll never allow it," I said automatically, then caught myself. Since when did I need David's permission to pursue my career? Sarah took my hand. "Remember that character in your book? Isabella? Remember how she found her strength?" Of course I remembered. Isabella was everything I wished I could be. Brave, independent, unafraid to speak her truth. I'd poured every ounce of my suppressed desires for freedom into her character. "The difference is," I said, "Isabella didn't have a mother-in-law like Margaret." Sarah's laugh was sharp. "No, she had something worse. And she still fought back. You know why your book is so powerful, Liz? Because it's not just Isabella's story. It's yours. It's every woman who's ever been told to be quiet, to be good, to be less." My phone screen lit up with another message from David, visible even though it was turned off. "If you're not home in an hour, don't bother coming back at all." Sarah saw it too. "He doesn't know about the contract, does he?" I shook my head. "No one knows except you. Well, and Margaret suspects something's up. You should have seen her face tonight." "What do you mean?" I described Margaret's reaction on the porch, the fear I'd glimpsed beneath her perfect mask. Sarah leaned back in her seat, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. "You know what's interesting? she said slowly. Last week, when I was researching publishers' recent acquisitions, I noticed something odd. Every book similar to yours that was submitted to Harper and Ross in the past year was rejected. Every single one. Then suddenly, they're offering you their biggest new author deal of the year. What are you saying? I'm saying that someone at Harper and Ross specifically asked to read your manuscript. Someone with enough influence to fast-track it straight to the top. And I'm starting to wonder if it has something to do with why Margaret Thompson looked scared tonight. A memory surfaced. Margaret, 3 months ago, taking a phone call during Sunday dinner. She'd stepped into the garden, but I'd heard snippets through the open window. You promised you'd never. How dare you? After all these years, at the time, I'd thought nothing of it. But now, Sarah's phone chimed, a text from her brother about the contract. He needs to know if you're signing, she said gently. They want an answer by New Year's. 6 days. I had 6 days to decide if I was ready to stop being David Thompson's silent wife and become Elizabeth Watson, author. To choose between the safe prison of my marriage and the terrifying freedom of the unknown. But as I sat there in the dark parking lot with my best friend, the contract that could change everything sitting heavy in my lap, I realized something else. Margaret's reaction tonight hadn't just been about my writing. There was something bigger here. Something that connected my novel, Harper and Ross, and the carefully maintained secrets of the Thompson family. The question was, did I have the courage to pull that thread and see what unraveled? A light snow began to fall, dusting the windshield with white. In the distance, church bells rang, marking the end of Christmas Day. I picked up my phone and turned it back on, my fingers hovering over David's messages. Sarah watched me, her face reflecting both hope and concern. Whatever you decide, she said quietly, I'm with you. But Liz, just remember, you wrote an entire novel about a woman finding her voice. Maybe it's time to find yours. I took a deep breath and began to type. David, we need to talk. Things are about to change. The house was dark when I finally pulled into our driveway at midnight. Only the porch light was on, David's passive-aggressive way of showing his disapproval. He always left all the lights blazing when he was worried or actually concerned about my whereabouts. I sat in the car for a few extra moments, my hand clutching the manila envelope containing the contract. The weight of it felt both terrifying and liberating. Sarah's words echoed in my mind. You wrote an entire novel about a woman finding her voice. Maybe it's time to find yours. The front door opened before I could reach for it. David stood there in his perfectly pressed pajamas, his face a mask of controlled anger. So nice of you to finally join me, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. I trust you finished your little dramatic display for the evening? I walked past him into the house, noticing how he'd positioned himself so I'd have to brush against him to enter. Another one of his subtle power plays. The living room still had our Christmas tree in the corner, presents underneath wrapped in coordinating papers that Margaret had chosen. Everything in its proper place, perfectly controlled. I'm not doing this tonight, David, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. We can talk tomorrow. He moved to block my path to the stairs. No, we're doing this now. You humiliated me in front of my entire family. You embarrassed my mother, and then you disappeared for hours without answering my calls? What were you thinking? I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, I saw something new in his expression. Uncertainty. My silence, my defiance, had shaken his confidence. I was thinking, I said carefully, about what your mother said, about no one reading my books. I pulled the contract from the envelope. It seems she was wrong. David's eyes narrowed as he scanned the document, his face going through a rapid series of expressions. Disbelief, anger, and then something else. Fear? Harper and Ross? He said, his voice strange. They offered you a contract? A 3-book deal, with a book tour. He laughed, but it sounded forced. Be serious, Elizabeth. You can barely speak in front of my family. How do you expect to go on a book tour? The same way I wrote a novel while you were telling me I couldn't. One day at a time. David's face hardened. He took a step toward me, using his height to loom over me like he always did when he wanted to intimidate me. You need to think very carefully about what you're doing right now. We have a good life. A perfect life. Why would you want to risk that for some fantasy? Fantasy? My voice rose slightly. Is that what you call my work? The same work that a major publishing house thinks is worth a six-figure advance? He recoiled as if I'd slapped him. 6 figures? He ran a hand through his hair, something he only did when he was losing control of a situation. You didn't sign this yet, did you? Would it matter if I had? Of course it would matter. He snatched the contract from my hands. We're married. These decisions affect both of us. You can't just what, David? Can't just make decisions about my own career? My own life? The sound of a car pulling into our driveway interrupted his response. Through the front window, I saw Margaret's Mercedes. David saw it too, and his expression changed to one of panic. Mother? What is she doing here at this hour? Margaret didn't wait for an invitation. She burst through the front door, still wearing her Christmas dinner dress but with a coat hastily thrown over it. Her face was flushed, her normally perfect hair slightly disheveled. David, I need to speak with Elizabeth. Alone. I'd never heard that tone in her voice before. David clearly hadn't either because he actually took a step back. Mother, it's after midnight. Whatever this is can wait until... It can't wait. Margaret's voice cracked slightly. She turned to me, and I saw again that flash of fear I'd noticed earlier. Elizabeth, please. 5 minutes. David moved to stand between us. Anything you need to say to my wife, you can say in front of me. Margaret drew herself up to her full height. David Thompson, for once in your life, do not argue with me. Go upstairs. Now. The shock of hearing his mother speak to him that way must have overwhelmed his desire to control the situation, because David actually obeyed, though not without a warning look in my direction. Once we heard his footsteps reach the top floor, Margaret seemed to deflate slightly. She sank onto our leather sofa, looking suddenly old and tired. How much do you know? She asked quietly. About what? About why Harper and Ross really accepted your book. My heart started pounding. What do you mean? She pulled an old photograph from her coat pocket with trembling hands. It showed a much younger version of herself standing with a man I didn't recognize. They were both smiling at the camera, his arm around her waist. This is Richard Ross, she said, of Harper and Ross Publishing. And 35 years ago, he was my fiancé. The implications of this revelation started to swirl in my mind, but before I could process them, we heard David's footsteps on the stairs. Margaret quickly tucked the photo away, standing up. Tomorrow, she whispered. Meet me at the Blue Corner Cafe at 10 a.m. Come alone. And Elizabeth? Her eyes met mine with an intensity I'd never seen before. Don't sign anything until we talk. She was gone before David reached the bottom of the stairs, leaving me with more questions than answers, and the distinct feeling that I'd just stepped into something much bigger than a publishing contract. David stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. What did she want? I thought about the fear in Margaret's eyes, the old photograph, and all the questions swirling in my mind. She wanted to apologize for dinner. I lied, watching his face carefully. She said she'd had too much wine. He studied me for a long moment, and I wondered if he could tell I was lying. Finally, he nodded. Come to bed. It's late, and you're clearly not thinking straight. As I followed him upstairs, my mind was racing. What was the connection between Margaret and Richard Ross? Why had she kept it a secret all these years? And most importantly, what did it have to do with my book? I lay awake long after David had fallen asleep, listening to his steady breathing and thinking about the choice ahead of me. Tomorrow's meeting with Margaret could change everything, or it could be another attempt to control me, to keep me in my place. The question was, which version of Margaret would I be meeting? The manipulative mother-in-law I'd known for 10 years, or the frightened woman with secrets who'd burst into my house tonight? As I finally drifted off to sleep, I realized something. For the first time in our marriage, I wasn't the only one afraid of what tomorrow might bring. The Blue Corner Cafe looked different in the morning light. I arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a secluded booth in the back, the same one where I'd written the final chapter of my novel. Sarah had offered to come with me, but this felt like something I needed to face alone. Margaret arrived exactly at 10 a.m., looking nothing like the polished society wife I was used to seeing. She wore minimal makeup, simple black slacks and a gray sweater that made her look softer, more human. Without her usual armor of designer clothes and perfectly styled hair, she seemed smaller somehow. "I ordered you a cappuccino," I said as she slid into the booth. "With an extra shot of espresso. That's how you like it, right?" She looked startled, as if surprised I'd noticed such a detail about her. "Yes, thank you." For a moment, we sat in awkward silence, the weight of 10 years of mutual distrust hanging between us. Finally, Margaret reached into her bag and pulled out a worn leather journal. "Before I show you this," she said, her fingers tracing the journal's edges, "I need you to understand something. The story you wrote in your novel, about a young woman trapped in a controlling relationship who discovers her own worth through a series of hidden letters." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "How did you come up with that plot?" The question caught me off guard. It just came to me. Over time. Through my own experiences, I suppose. Margaret nodded slowly. "That's what I thought too at first. But then I read this passage." She opened the journal to a marked page and began to read. "My dearest R, the letters you send are my only freedom in this golden cage. Through your words, I find the strength to believe in myself again, to remember who I was before." My coffee cup clattered against its saucer. The words were eerily similar to a scene in my novel, where Isabella finds old letters in her grandmother's attic. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Those words, they're almost exactly like page 157 of your manuscript?" Margaret closed the journal. "Elizabeth, these are my letters, written 35 years ago, to Richard Ross." The cafe seemed to spin around me. "But how? I've never seen this journal before." "No, you haven't. But creativity has a way of channeling truth, doesn't it? Sometimes we write stories we don't even know we're telling." She pushed the journal toward me. "Read it. All of it. It might help you understand why I've been who I've been." With trembling hands, I opened the journal. The pages were filled with Margaret's elegant handwriting, dated entries spanning from 1989 to 1990. As I read, a story emerged that made my heart race. Margaret had been engaged to Richard Ross, the junior partner at what was then a small publishing house. They were madly in love, planning a future together. But Margaret's father, a powerful man in publishing circles, disapproved. He arranged for her to meet Thomas Thompson, David's father, a more suitable match. "Your father-in-law," Margaret said quietly, "was very much like his son, charming in public, controlling in private. My father thought he was doing what was best for me, ensuring a stable future with a proper family." I looked up from the journal. "Did you love him, Thomas?" "I thought I could learn to. That's what women of my generation were taught, that love grows from duty, from doing the right thing." Her laugh was bitter. "What I didn't realize was that I was trading one cage for another. Thomas, he made David look positively enlightened in comparison." The implications slowly sank in. "Is that why, with me, all these years, why I helped David control you?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Because I became what was done to me. Because it was easier to be the jailer than the prisoner. Because," she took a shuddering breath, "because every time I saw you writing, saw that light in your eyes, it reminded me of everything I gave up." A memory surfaced. Margaret, at one of the first family dinners after my marriage, watching me scribble notes for a story idea on a napkin. There had been something in her expression then, something I'd never understood until now. "But Richard Ross," I started, "found your manuscript because I sent it to him." She pulled out her phone, showing me an email. "After all these years, we've stayed in touch. Secret emails, Christmas cards sent to a P.O. box. He's married now. Happy. But when I read your book, Elizabeth, you captured everything I never had the courage to say. Everything I wish I'd done differently. Does David know about any of this?" David worships his father's memory. He has no idea that the perfect family he grew up in was built on a foundation of control and fear. She reached across the table, taking my hand. "But you have a chance I never took. Your book. It's not just good, Elizabeth. It's important. It's true." The bell above the cafe door chimed. We both turned to see David walking in, his face thunderous. Margaret snatched her hand back, but not before he saw it. "Well, well," he said, his voice carrying that dangerous calm I knew too well. "Having a cozy chat with my wife, Mother? After explicitly telling me this morning you had a charity board meeting?" Margaret straightened her spine, but I saw her hands trembling. "David, save it." He turned to me. "The car. Now." I stayed seated. "No." The single word seemed to echo in the suddenly silent cafe. David's face reddened. "Excuse me?" I said, "No, David. I'm not finished talking with your mother." He leaned down, his voice a harsh whisper. "You're making a scene." "No, you are." I stood up, gathering Margaret's journal and my purse. "And I'm done being afraid of scenes." I turned to Margaret. "Thank you for sharing this with me. I'll read every word." "Elizabeth!" David's voice held a warning, but I was already walking toward the door. "Oh, and David?" I turned back, speaking loudly enough for the whole cafe to hear. "I'm signing that contract. The book tour starts in March. You can either support me in this, or what?" he challenged. I thought of Margaret's journal, of all the years she'd lived with regret. "Or you can find someone else to control. I'm done." As I walked out into the bright winter morning, I heard Margaret's voice behind me. "Let her go, David. For once in your life, just let someone go." I made it halfway down the block before the tears started. Not tears of fear or sadness, but of relief. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Just heard from Harper and Ross. They need the contract today. You ready?" Looking back at the cafe, I could see David and Margaret in what appeared to be an intense argument. Another text came through, this one from an unknown number. "This is Richard Ross. Margaret told me about the cafe. Your voice matters, Elizabeth. Don't let anyone silence it." I took a deep breath and typed my response to Sarah. "Meet me at your office in an hour. Bring the contract and a pen. It's time." The next chapter of my life was about to begin, and for the first time, I was the one writing it. The signing of the contract felt both anticlimactic and monumental. Sarah's office was quiet except for the scratch of my pen against paper, the steady ticking of the wall clock, and my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. 3 signatures. That's all it took to change everything. "It's done," Sarah said, her voice barely containing her excitement as she faxed the signed contract to Harper and Ross. "You're officially a contracted author, Liz." My phone had been buzzing continuously since I left the cafe. I finally looked at it. 15 missed calls from David, 5 from his sister Caroline, and dozens of text messages. But what caught my eye was a single message from Margaret. "I've moved to the 4 Seasons. Room 512, if you need somewhere to go. You can stay with me," Sarah offered, reading over my shoulder. "My guest room is always ready." I shook my head. "I need to go home." Running away would just prove David right. That I'm weak, that I can't handle real life. The drive home felt surreal. The same streets I'd traveled thousands of times looked different somehow, as if my shifted perspective had altered the whole world. When I pulled into our driveway, David's car was there, along with Caroline's SUV. A family intervention, no doubt. I found them in the living room. David was pacing, while Caroline sat primly on the edge of the sofa. The Christmas tree lights were still blinking, creating an oddly festive backdrop to the tension in the room. "Where's the contract?" David demanded as soon as I walked in. "Signed and submitted to Harper and Ross." I kept my voice steady, though my hands were shaking. I clutched Margaret's journal tighter. Caroline stood up, her perfectly maintained facade cracking slightly. "Lizzie, darling, we're worried about you. These impulsive decisions, it's not like you." "That's where you're wrong, Caroline. This isn't impulsive. I've been writing this book for 5 years. The only difference is that now someone else sees its value." "Value?" David laughed harshly. "You mean my mother's old flame pulled some strings? Don't think I haven't figured that out." "Richard Ross offered me a contract because the book is good," I said. "Yes, Margaret sent it to him, but he's a businessman, not a charity. He wouldn't risk his company's reputation on a favor to an old girlfriend." "You have no idea what you're talking about," David snapped. "You don't know how the real world works, how business works, how families work," I cut in. "Like how your father worked? Controlling every aspect of your mother's life until she forgot who she was?" The color drained from David's face. What lies has she been telling you? I held up the journal. No lies, David. Just truth. 35 years of it, written in your mother's own hand. Caroline sank back onto the sofa. Mother's journal? But she never lets anyone... Because it tells the truth about your perfect family, about how your father isolated her, controlled her, just like David does with me. The words were pouring out now, years of silence finally breaking. Did you ever wonder why she pushed me so hard to be the perfect wife? Why she criticized everything I did? She was recreating the only life she knew how to live. Our father was a great man. David's voice was dangerous now. He built this family, gave us everything. He built a prison, I said quietly. And you've been so busy trying to live up to his legacy that you never questioned what that legacy really was. Caroline was crying silently now. I remember. There were times when Mother would lock herself in her room for days. Father said she was having one of her episodes. Stop it, David shouted. Just stop it. None of this changes anything. You signed that contract without my permission. I didn't need your permission, David. Just like I don't need your permission to tell my story, or to go on the book tour, or to be my own person. He moved toward me, his face contorted with anger, but Caroline suddenly stood between us. David, don't. Please. The moment stretched like a wire about to snap. Then David's phone rang. Margaret's ringtone. He stared at it, then at the journal in my hands, then at his sister's tear-stained face. This isn't over, he said finally, his voice cold. When this all falls apart, and it will, don't expect me to be there to pick up the pieces. For once, I replied, you're right. It isn't over. It's just beginning. After David stormed out, Caroline stayed behind, looking lost. Was it really that bad? She whispered. With Father? I handed her Margaret's journal. Read it. Then ask yourself why you've never seen your mother truly happy. She took the journal with trembling hands. Where is she? Mother? Somewhere safe. Somewhere she can remember who she was before she became Mrs. Thomas Thompson. Caroline nodded slowly. And you? Where will you go? I looked around the living room, at all the perfectly arranged furniture and coordinated decorations that had never really felt like mine. I'm staying right here. This house is half mine, legally, and I have a book to finish editing. After Caroline left, I went upstairs to the small room I'd used as my writing space. David had always called it my hobby room, dismissing it as unimportant. Now I stood in the doorway, seeing it with new eyes. This room, with its worn desk and crowded bookshelves, had been my sanctuary, my escape, and now it would become my launching pad. My phone buzzed with an email from Harper and Ross, the editing timeline for the book. As I read through it, another message came through from Margaret. Found an old box in storage. Letters from Richard, photos, papers. Things that might help you understand. But more importantly, things that might help you write your next book. The real story this time. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. Outside, I could hear David's car returning. Could imagine him coming in, expecting me to have come to my senses. But I wasn't the same woman who had left this house this morning. I opened a new document and began to type. Chapter 1. The stories we inherit are not always the stories we have to live. The cursor blinked, waiting for what came next. For the first time in my life, I couldn't wait to find out. The first month after signing the contract taught me more about myself than the previous 10 years of marriage. David hadn't moved out, but he might as well have been a ghost, sleeping in the guest room, leaving for work before dawn, returning late at night. The silence between us echoed through the house like a physical presence. I threw myself into the editing process, working closely with Claire, my editor at Harper and Ross. She was brilliant, incisive, and completely unaware of the personal connection that had brought my manuscript to her desk. Richard Ross had kept his word. My book would succeed or fail on its own merits. These revisions are really bringing out the heart of the story, Claire said during one of our video calls. But I feel like there's something you're holding back in Chapter 7, where Isabella confronts her husband's family. I glanced at Margaret's journal, which had become my constant companion. What What if Isabella discovers that her mother-in-law was also a victim? That the cycle of control goes back generations? Claire's eyes lit up. Yes, that adds a whole new layer of complexity. It makes the antagonist more human, more tragic. Can you have it ready by next week? After the call, I sat in my writing room, staring at the blank document on my screen. The house felt especially empty. David had left for a business trip 3 days ago, though Caroline had accidentally let slip that he was actually staying at their cousin's beach house. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Lunch tomorrow? I have more stories to share. Over the past weeks, Margaret and I had developed an unlikely alliance. She'd moved out of the hotel and into a small apartment downtown, her first time living alone in nearly 4 decades. Each time we met, she seemed lighter, more alive, as if shedding years of carefully maintained perfection. Found this while unpacking, she said at lunch the next day, sliding an old newspaper clipping across the table. It showed a young Margaret accepting a writing award in college. I'd forgotten I used to write poetry. Thomas made me stop after we married. Said it wasn't befitting of a Thompson wife. What were your poems about? Her eyes grew distant. Freedom. Love. All the things a 20-year-old girl thinks she understands. She laughed softly. Maybe that's why your book spoke to me so deeply. It reminded me of who I was before I learned to be afraid. Back home, I found David in the kitchen, making coffee as if he hadn't been gone for days. He looked tired, his usual polished appearance slightly frayed at the edges. Caroline showed me Mother's journal, he said without preamble. I froze in the doorway. And I've been talking to someone, a therapist. The words seemed to cost him physical effort. She thinks I have issues. About father. About control. It wasn't an apology, not even close, but it was more self-awareness than I'd ever heard from him. That's good, I said carefully. He turned to face me, his hands gripping his coffee mug too tightly. The book tour starts in 2 weeks. Yes? Will you come back? After? The question hung between us, heavy with everything unsaid. I thought about Margaret's college writing award, about all the young women who'd had their voices silenced, their dreams redirected into acceptable channels. I don't know, I answered honestly. I'm not the same person I was on Christmas Day. No, he said quietly. You're the person you were always trying not to be. That night, I couldn't sleep. I found myself in the living room, surrounded by the first printed proofs of my book. The dedication page stared up at me. For every woman who ever swallowed her words, your story matters. My phone lit up with an email from Richard Ross. Elizabeth, early reviews are coming in. They're calling it a raw and honest exploration of generational trauma and female empowerment. Margaret was right about you. You're not just telling a story, you're starting a conversation. I clicked on the attached PDF, the first professional review of my book. As I read, tears began to fall on the pages. The Silent Echo isn't just another domestic drama. It's a masterful examination of how silence becomes a hereditary trait, passed down from mother to daughter, mother-in-law to daughter-in-law. Watson's prose cuts through generations of accepted truths to reveal the violent quiet at the heart of so many perfect families. A noise made me look up. David stood in the doorway, watching me cry over my reviews. I found my old journals, he said abruptly. From when I was a kid. I used to hide them from Father. He said journaling was for girls and weaklings. I waited, sensing there was more. I wrote about Mother, he continued. About how she'd change when Father was around, how she'd get smaller, quieter. I wrote about how I never wanted to make anyone feel that way. He laughed bitterly. Guess I failed spectacularly at that. We can't change the past, David. No. He ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture of uncertainty. But we can write a different future, right? Isn't that what your book is about? Before I could respond, my phone buzzed again. A message from my publisher. They were increasing the initial print run. The pre-orders were exceeding expectations. They wanted to know if I'd consider moving up the release date. They want to capitalize on the early buzz, I explained, not sure why I was telling him this. David nodded slowly. You know what's strange? For the first time since this all started, I'm proud of you and terrified by you. Both at once. I'm scared too, I admitted, but not of the same things anymore. He turned to leave, then paused. Mother sent me a poem she wrote, from college. It was about a bird in a gilded cage, thinking the gold bars meant she was valuable. He met my eyes. I never knew she wrote poetry. There's a lot we never knew about her, about ourselves. After he left, I opened my laptop and began working on the new chapter Claire had suggested. But instead of writing about Isabella's confrontation with her in-laws, I found myself writing about her mother-in-law's college poetry, about generations of silenced voices finding their way back to paper. Sometimes I was learning, the stories we need to tell aren't the ones we originally set out to write. Sometimes they're the ones that have been waiting decades to be heard. The cursor blinked expectantly, and for the first time since Christmas, I knew exactly what came next. The week before my book launch, I found myself standing in front of my closet, staring at clothes that no longer felt like mine. Everything seemed to belong to the old Elizabeth, the one who dressed to please David, to fit into the Thompson family image. Burn it all, Sarah suggested, sprawled on my bed with a glass of wine. Okay, maybe not burn, but donate. Start fresh. I pulled out a blue silk dress that David had chosen for last year's Christmas party. It's strange. I keep thinking about that night, how different everything was just 2 months ago. Speaking of different, Sarah sat up, suddenly serious. Have you read today's paper? She handed me her tablet, open to the society pages of our local newspaper. There, in full color, was a photo of Margaret at a poetry reading. The headline read, Margaret Thompson returns to her literary roots. The article detailed how Margaret Thompson, prominent social figure and philanthropist, had begun hosting weekly poetry workshops for women at the Downtown Women's Center. It included a quote from her, "It's never too late to find your voice again." My phone buzzed. A text from Caroline. Did you see? Mother's trending locally on Twitter. David's having a meltdown. As if summoned by her message, I heard the front door open and David's footsteps in the hallway. Sarah squeezed my hand and made a tactical retreat, passing David in the doorway. Poetry workshops? His voice was strained. Mothers giving poetry workshops to abuse survivors? I set down the tablet. She's good at it. I attended last week's session. This isn't what Thompsons do. We don't air our dirty laundry in public. We don't write books about family secrets. I finished for him. Share our stories? Help other women find their voices? He slumped against the door frame. The partners at the firm are talking. Everyone's talking. About Mother, about your book, about... He gestured helplessly. Everything's falling apart. No, I said gently. Everything's falling into place. It's different. My phone lit up with another message, this time from my publisher. The advance copy of my book had been leaked to a major feminist book club on Instagram. It was going viral. They wanted to move the release date up even further. It's happening, isn't it? David asked quietly. You're really going to tell everyone our secrets. Not secrets, truths. There's a difference. I showed him my phone. Look at the comments from women who've read the advance copy. They're telling their own stories now. This is bigger than just us. He read for a moment, his expression unreadable. There's one here about her father being like me. Like father. He looked up. Is that how people will see me now? As the villain in your story? You're not the villain, David. You're just another character shaped by the same silence that shaped your father, and his father before him. I paused. But you can choose to be something different now. The next day, I met Margaret for lunch. She looked younger somehow, dressed in artist black with a colorful scarf. So different from her usual pearls and pantsuit uniform. Richard called, she said, stirring her tea. The early numbers for your book. They're unprecedented. He thinks it could hit the bestseller list in its first week. Are you ready for that? For everyone to read between the lines and recognize parts of your story? She smiled. A real smile. Not her old society mask. I spent 35 years being ready. I just needed someone else to go first. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small book, which is why I wanted to give you this. It was a slim volume of poetry, professionally bound. The cover read, Silenced Verses. Poems from the Gilded Cage by Margaret Evans Thompson. Richard's publishing it, she said quietly. A small run. Nothing like your book. But it's time. That evening, I sat in my writing room, Margaret's poetry book open beside my own advance copy. The parallel stories, mine looking forward, hers looking back, seemed to speak to each other across the pages. My phone buzzed with a message from David. At my therapist's. She thinks I should read your book before it comes out. The whole thing, not just the parts I'm in. Would you bring me a copy? Another message followed quickly. And maybe Mother's poetry too? If she's okay with that. I thought about the generational weight of silence, how it had pressed down on all of us in different ways, about how breaking that silence wasn't just an act of rebellion, but of healing. The doorbell rang. It was Caroline, holding a bottle of champagne and a tear-stained copy of the advance reader proof. I finished it, she said simply. And I need to tell you about some things. About Father. About what I saw and never said. We stayed up late into the night, sharing stories we'd never dared to voice before. At some point, Margaret joined us, bringing her own bottle and her book of poems. We read them aloud to each other, crying and laughing, each verse breaking another chain of silence. Near midnight, my phone lit up with a final email from my publisher. They'd moved up the release date to next week. My book tour would start in New York, then Los Angeles, then circle back home for a reading at, of all places, the Blue Corner Cafe. Are you ready? Caroline asked, refilling our glasses. I looked around at these women, my former adversaries turned allies, and thought about all the readers waiting to see their own stories reflected in our words. You know what? I think we all are. Margaret raised her glass. To the stories we were afraid to tell. To the voices we're finally finding, Caroline added. I thought about David, sitting in his therapist's office, asking to read not just my book but his mother's poems. About how healing sometimes comes in unexpected ways, through unexpected people. To the silence we're breaking, I said, and the truth we're finally ready to hear. Outside, the night was quiet. But it was a different kind of quiet now. Not the suffocating silence of secrets kept, but the peaceful quiet of truth finally spoken. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the book launch, the tour, the public reaction to our family's unmasking. But tonight, in this room full of reformed secret keepers, we were already free. The morning of my book launch dawned crisp and clear. I stood in front of the mirror in my hotel room in New York, barely recognizing myself in the emerald green dress Sarah had helped me choose. Gone was the careful, controlled wardrobe of a Thompson wife, replaced by something bolder, more authentically me. 5 minutes until the car arrives, Sarah called from the other room. Are you ready for this? The truth was, I didn't know if anyone could be ready for what was about to happen. My phone had been exploding since dawn. Early reviews were hitting the major papers. The New York Times had called The Silent Echo a searing examination of inherited trauma and feminine resilience. The Washington Post praised its unflinching honesty in confronting generational patterns of control. But it was the social media response that truly overwhelmed me. Women were sharing their own stories using The Silent Echo, creating a wave of revelations that had started as a ripple and grown into a tsunami. A knock at the door made me jump. Sarah opened it to reveal Margaret, looking elegant in a deep purple suit, her silver hair styled in a modern cut that took years off her face. The lobby is packed with reporters, she said, closing the door behind her. Someone leaked that I'm here. They're calling it the real-life inspiration angle. Are you okay with that? I asked, watching her reflection in the mirror. She smiled, that new, genuine smile that still surprised me every time I saw it. I'm more than okay. Richard's downstairs, too. We're done hiding. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Just landed at JFK. Caroline's flight gets in at noon. We'll see you at the bookstore. The fact that David was coming at all still felt surreal. After reading the final version of the book last week, he'd spent 3 days at a private retreat recommended by his therapist. When he returned, something had shifted. I see him now, he'd said quietly. Father, what he did to all of us, what I almost became. The Barnes & Noble in Union Square was already packed when we arrived. Through the windows, I could see the line snaking around the block. Sarah squeezed my hand. Remember when you thought no one would read your book? The next few hours passed in a blur. I read excerpts, answered questions, signed hundreds of books. Women of all ages shared their stories with me and whispered confessions as I signed their copies. "This was my mother's story," one elderly woman told me, tears in her eyes. I wish she'd lived to read it. Halfway through the signing, I looked up to see David standing at the back of the store, watching. Our eyes met across the crowded space. He gave me a small nod, not quite approval, not quite apology, but acknowledgement. It was enough. The real surprise came during the Q&A session. A young woman stood up, her voice shaking. "My mother-in-law rules our family like a dictator," she said. "But reading your book, and then Mrs. Thompson's poetry collection, it made me understand her differently. See her as a person who's also trapped. How do we break these cycles?" Before I could answer, Margaret stepped forward to the microphone. "We break them by speaking," she said clearly. "By refusing to pass down the silence. By helping each other find our voices again." The room erupted in applause. I saw Caroline in the crowd, wiping tears from her eyes. Next to her, David sat very still, his therapist's business card visible in his shirt pocket. After the event, we gathered at a small restaurant nearby, the whole unlikely group of us. David and Margaret, Caroline and Sarah, Richard Ross and his wife Susan, who had become one of Margaret's closest friends. The waiter brought champagne. "A toast," Richard proposed, raising his glass. "To the power of words. To breaking cycles," David added quietly. "To new beginnings," Margaret said, her hand finding Richard's wife's in a gesture of friendship that would have been unimaginable months ago. Later that night, back in my hotel room, I found a note that David had slipped into my purse. "I'm not ready to move back home," it read. "You need space to grow into this new version of yourself, and I need time to make sure I'm truly changing, not just performing change, but I'm proud of you. And I'm learning to be proud of myself for trying to be better." My phone lit up with a notification. The silent echo was trending nationwide. Women were organizing reading groups, sharing resources for domestic abuse survivors, starting conversations about generational trauma and healing. Sarah sent me a link to a new review that had just gone live. Watson's novel does more than tell a story. It gives permission. Permission to speak, to question, to challenge the narratives we've inherited. In doing so, she's created more than a bestseller. She's sparked a movement. I walked to the window, looking out at the glittering New York skyline. Somewhere out there, women were reading my words, finding their voices, starting their own journeys. Margaret was probably in her room, writing new poems. David was in his hotel, doing the hard work of unlearning his father's lessons. Caroline was planning her own memoir. We were all writing new stories now. My phone buzzed one last time, a message from an unknown number. "Your book saved my life tonight. I finally found the courage to leave him. Thank you for telling your truth so I could find mine." I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, remembering that Christmas dinner that felt like a lifetime ago. "While everyone here has a career, you insist on these childish dreams," David had said. "Sometimes our deepest wounds become our greatest gifts. Sometimes our silent echoes become battle cries. And sometimes, when we're brave enough to speak our truth, we find that the whole world has been waiting to echo it back." 6 months later, the Blue Corner Cafe looked exactly the same, but everything else had changed. I sat in my usual booth, surrounded by familiar faces that now held unfamiliar expressions. It was Margaret's idea to gather here today, exactly half a year after the book launch that had transformed all our lives. "Your royalty statements came in," Sarah announced, sliding into the booth beside me. "Third straight month on the bestseller list. The publisher wants to move up the timeline for your second book." I smiled, watching the door as more people arrived. Caroline came in first, clutching a thick manuscript, her own story, finally taking shape. Behind her was Margaret, hand in hand with her new girlfriend Rachel, whom she'd met at one of her poetry workshops. The simple gold band that had defined her for 35 years was noticeably absent from her finger. "Have you seen this morning's announcement?" Caroline asked, pulling up a news article on her phone. The headline read, "Thompson and Associates launches domestic violence pro bono program. David's initiative." After months of intense therapy and group counseling, he'd started using his law firm's resources to help women escape abusive situations. He wasn't ready for a reconciliation. We both knew we needed more time and growth. But he was doing the work, facing his inherited demons one day at a time. "Speaking of announcements," Margaret said, reaching into her bag, "look what arrived this morning." She handed me a book catalog. There, among the fall releases, was her second poetry collection, Breaking Chains, Poems of Liberation. The cover photo showed her sitting at this very cafe, laughing. "Richard says the pre-orders are strong," she added, her eyes sparkling. "Apparently, there's a market for 70-ish women writing about breaking free and finding love again." Rachel squeezed her hand. They'd met 3 months ago when Margaret started teaching poetry workshops at the LGBTQ+ community center. "I always knew who I was," Margaret had told me. "I just never had the courage to be that person until now." The bell above the door chimed again. David walked in, looking different in casual clothes instead of his usual suits. He'd moved into a small apartment downtown, started taking art classes, something he'd loved as a child before his father steered him toward law. "Sorry I'm late," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. "Group ran long today. We'd developed a careful friendship over the past months, learning to separate the trauma bonds of our marriage from the genuine care we still felt for each other. Last week, he'd shown me some of his sketches, raw, honest drawings that told the story of his own healing journey. "Oh, before I forget," Sarah interjected, pulling out her tablet. "The Women's Shelter wants to know if you're still willing to speak at their fundraiser next month. They're naming their new library after the Silent Echo." I nodded, thinking about all the women who'd find refuge there, who might see their own stories reflected in those pages and find the courage to write new endings. My phone buzzed, a message from my editor about the draft of my second book. This one was different, telling the story of Margaret and the women in her poetry group, exploring how it's never too late to reclaim your voice, your truth, your identity. "Remember last Christmas?" Caroline asked suddenly. Who could have guessed we'd all be here like this? I looked around the table, at Margaret, radiant in her hard-won authenticity, at Caroline, finally telling her own story, at David, doing the painful work of breaking generational patterns, at Sarah, who'd believed in me before I believed in myself. "Actually," Margaret said, "I have one more announcement." She took a deep breath. "The Women's Center has offered me a permanent position as their creative writing director, and I've decided to legally change my name back to Evans." The significance of this decision, shedding the Thompson name that had defined her for so long, wasn't lost on any of us. David reached across the table and squeezed his mother's hand. "Dad would have hated all of this," he said softly. "Which probably means we're doing something right." The waitress brought our usual orders. She knew us all by now, had watched our story unfold in this very cafe. As she set down my cappuccino, I noticed she was carrying a copy of my book. "Would you sign it?" she asked shyly. "Your story. It helped me leave a bad situation. Started counseling last month." As I signed her book, I thought about that Christmas dinner that felt like a lifetime ago. "No one will ever read your books," they'd said. But they were wrong. The words we're most afraid to speak are often the ones others most need to hear. "What should we toast to?" Caroline asked, raising her coffee cup. "To breaking silence," Margaret suggested. "To healing," David added. "To truth," said Sarah. I looked at my reflection in the cafe window, a woman I finally recognized, finally loved. "To all of it," I said. "To every word we were afraid to say, every story we were afraid to tell, every truth we were afraid to live." As our cups clinked together, I saw the waitress return to her station, clutching my book to her chest like a shield, like a promise, like a key to her own cage. Another silent echo, finding its voice. Outside, autumn leaves danced past the window, golden in the afternoon light. Inside, we sat together, not as victims or villains, but as storytellers, truth seekers, chain breakers, each of us writing our own next chapters, one word at a time. The cafe's bell chimed again as new customers walked in. I opened my laptop to work on my second book, surrounded by the people who had become both my story and my audience. The cursor blinked on the empty page, but I wasn't afraid of it anymore. After all, the best stories are the ones that tell us we're not alone, the ones that show us who we might become if we're brave enough to try. And this story? It was still being written.